My wife sent me to prison after my mother-in-law accused me of hurting our 5-year-old daughter. Everyone believed their lies. I left the courtroom in handcuffs, but the day I walked free, they had no idea their perfect lives were about to collapse. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. There is a particular sound a courtroom makes when everyone inside it has already decided you are guilty. It is not loud. It is a kind of settled, heavy quiet, the sound of a room that has stopped listening to you and is only waiting now for the formality of the words. Reed Sutton heard that sound on the day they took him away from his daughter, and he heard it in his sleep every single night for the 3 years that followed. He built things for a living. That is the first thing to understand about Reed Sutton, because in the end it was the only thing that saved him. He had bought a failing diner in Auburn, Indiana, at 26, with a bank loan he had no business being approved for, and he had turned it, over 15 hard years, into a small chain of 6 family restaurants across the northern part of the state, all of them with his name over the door. Every one of them built the slow way, one 14-hour shift at a time. He knew how to take a broken, failing thing and rebuild it into something that stood. He did not yet know, the day the courtroom made that settled quiet sound, that the broken thing he would one day have to rebuild would be his own life, from nothing, from a concrete floor. His daughter was named Ivy, and she was 5 years old the year his life ended. She had a gap where her front teeth were coming in and a serious way of considering the world. And her favorite thing in the world was to sit on an upturned milk crate in the kitchen of the Auburn restaurant and help her father plate the desserts, which mostly meant eating the garnishes off the plates when he pretended not to see. Reed had loved a handful of things in his life. He had never loved anything, before or since, the way he loved that small, serious girl on the milk crate stealing raspberries off the dessert plates. His wife was Colette, and behind Colette, always, stood her mother, Yvonne Calder, and those two women were the other half of everything that came for Reed Sutton. He will be plain about them, because there is no soft or generous way to say the truth, and he has stopped trying to find one. Colette and Yvonne loved money the way other people love their own children, completely, protectively, without limit. Yvonne had spent a whole hard life clawing at a status that always stayed one rung above her reach, and she had raised Colette to do the clawing better. Colette had married Reed. He came to understand much later the way a person makes an investment, and by the year everything fell apart, the investment had simply stopped paying her the dividend she felt she was owed. 6 restaurants in Reed's name, a good house in Reed's name, a comfortable life she wanted very much, attached, inconveniently, to a husband she no longer did. There is a clean way to leave a marriage. Colette did not want the clean way, and Reed understands exactly why now, though it cost him 3 years to understand it. The clean way meant a fair division. The clean way meant Reed kept most of what Reed had built, because he had built it and walked away with his name and his freedom and his daughter. Colette did not want most. Colette wanted all of it. And there is exactly one accusation in this world that strips a man of everything he has at the same instant. His freedom, his money, his good name, and his child, all 4 in a single stroke of a pen. The 2 of them reached for it. Reed has gone back over the last good year 1,000 times, looking for the moment he should have seen it coming. And the truth is that it was hidden in plain sight, the way the worst things always are. Yvonne moving in just to help, after Colette's back trouble, and never leaving. The 2 of them going quiet whenever Reed came into a room, then bright again a beat too late. A remark Colette made once, at a dinner, that he'd let slide, that a man Reed's age with his assets really ought to have everything in order, God forbid something happens. He'd thought she meant a will. He knows now she meant a plan. He had built his whole life on reading a failing business, on catching the small wrong number in a ledger before it sank the whole quarter. And he had missed the failing thing sitting at his own dinner table because he had never once let himself imagine that the people who ate his food and slept under his roof were doing sums about how to take it. That blindness is the one part of all of this that Reed holds against himself, and only himself, to this day. It began with Ivy's arm. She came home from a weekend at Yvonne's house with her small arm in a cast, and Reed nearly came apart on the spot, frantic, asking 100 questions all at once. A spiral fracture, the doctors had called it, the kind of break that comes from a hard, twisting force. And through all of Reed's panic, Two things sat wrong in the corner of his mind. Two things he was far too frightened to properly see at the time. Colette was strangely, smoothly calm about the whole thing. And Yvonne was already telling the story of how it happened before anyone in the room had thought to ask her for it. Within a week, there were detectives standing in the dining room of his Auburn restaurant, asking him to step into the back. Within a month, there was a formal charge. And the charge, the thing the state of Indiana had decided to accuse Reed Sutton of, was that he had done it, that he had taken his own 5-year-old daughter and twisted her arm until it broke. Reed needs people to understand exactly how it was done, because it is the most purely evil thing he has ever encountered in his life, and it was carried out by two women in soft cardigans who never once raised their voices in public. Yvonne had broken Ivy's arm. Reed knows that beyond any doubt now, though it would take years and a second courtroom to prove it. And in the days after she did it, the two of them had gone quietly to work on a terrified 5-year-old, coaching her, rehearsing her, hour after hour, telling her exactly what to say and exactly who to point to, telling her that if she did not say it, something far worse would happen to her. And to a child, that age, the something worse was not a threat. It was a memory, because Yvonne had already shown her what she was capable of. Colette took the stand and testified softly, tearfully about Reed's temper, a temper the two of them had spent a careful, quiet year describing to the neighbors, so that when the accusation finally dropped, the ground beneath it would already be soft and ready to take the seed. And then they put his little girl in front of a jury, and his little girl, shaking, staring at the floor, unable to lift her eyes to her father, said the words that two grown women had spent a week pressing into her mouth. "There is no defending yourself against the testimony of your own child." Reed's lawyer tried, but the jurors looked at the small cast on the small arm, and they looked at a crying 5-year-old, and they looked at a big man across the room who owned 6 restaurants and had, they'd been told, a temper, and the room made that settled, quiet sound, and Reed Sutton felt the floor of his entire life drop away beneath him. They convicted him, 3 to 5 years, and the judge said a number of grave and cutting things about the sacred trust between a father and his child, and Reed could not hear a word of it over the roaring in his own ears. He left that courtroom in handcuffs. The last thing he saw before the door closed behind him was Colette, who was not crying now, and Yvonne, with her chin lifted high, and neither of them looking in his direction at all, because in their minds the matter was already settled, and they had moved on, already, to the pleasant business of spending everything they had just won. Prison is a hard place for any man. Prison for a man convicted of hurting his own child is a specific and vicious circle of it. And Reed will not put down here the details of what those first months were, except to say that after living through them, he stopped being surprised that some men do not come out the other side. He lost everything he had on the outside while he was locked inside, where he could not lift a hand to stop any of it. Colette divorced him from the comfortable distance a person keeps from a convicted felon. She took the house, through a fast and ugly legal process built entirely on the foundation of his conviction. She took the restaurants, all 6 of them, and one by one Reed's name came down off the doors he had spent 15 years putting it up over. She took the money, and in the eyes of the entire state, in the eyes of the law and the town and the world, she took his daughter. There was exactly one person in that whole world who did not believe a single word of it. His sister, Cora, sat down across from Reed at a scratched steel visiting room table in his 3rd week inside, and she looked at him through the noise and the fluorescent light, and she said, "I have known you your entire life. You did not do this. I am not going anywhere, and neither is the truth, no matter how long it takes." And then she said the thing that would keep Reed Sutton breathing for 3 years. "I'm still seeing Ivy. Colette can't stop me from being that child's aunt. Not yet. Not legally. And Reed, listen to me. I'm watching her. Something is wrong in that house. I don't know what it is yet, but I am watching, and I am writing down every single thing I see." Reed did not break down at that table. He decided something instead. He decided that he was going to get back to his daughter, no matter how many years it took to do it, and that until the day he could, his sister was going to be his eyes on the outside. He kept one photograph. The prison let him have it after a while. A small creased picture of Ivy on the milk crate in the Auburn kitchen, a smear of raspberry on her chin, mid-laugh at something he'd said behind the camera. He taped it inside the door of his locker, and on the nights that were bad, and there were a great many of them, he would lie on his bunk and look at that raspberry smear and that laugh. and he would tell himself the only sentence that worked. Still here. Still her father. Still coming home. An old man 3 cells down, a lifer named Dutch who had watched a lot of men arrive and a lot of men fold, told Reed one night without being asked that the ones who make it are never the tough ones. They're the ones who've got one thing on the outside they refuse to let go of. Reed had his one thing taped inside a locker door. He never let go of it, not for one single day of 3 years. It turns out that a man can do a great deal from inside a cell if he simply refuses to stop. Reed Sutton became a paralegal for his own life. He read every book the prison library held on appeals and on wrongful convictions, and then he read them again. He filled legal pads with careful block printing. He wrote letters, hundreds of them, to law schools and journalists and advocacy groups and anyone else he could think of who might listen to a convicted man swearing he was innocent. And most of those letters went exactly where most letters from prison go, which is nowhere. But a man who has built 6 restaurants out of one failing diner understands that most of the doors you knock on stay shut, and that the whole job is to keep knocking until one of them doesn't. Cora came every visiting day she was allowed, 2 hours each way, and she never once missed one. Not in 3 years, not through a snowstorm, not through her own hard patches. She would sit across the scratched steel table and tell him everything, the small ordinary news that was a lifeline, and then lower the other news, the news about Ivy. She brought drawings sometimes, ones Ivy had made at her house, and Reed taped those up too until the inside of his locker door was a small gallery of a childhood he was being made to miss. Once, only once, Cora broke down at that table and put her face in her hands and said she didn't know how much longer she could sit in that house and smile at those 2 women while she watched what was happening to that little girl. And Reed, who had every right to be the one falling apart, reached across the table and held his sister's wrist and told her the same thing he told the photograph. Just don't let go. Keep writing it down. It's going to matter. He did not know yet how right he was. One of them didn't. After the better part of 2 years, a letter reached a wrongful conviction clinic run out of a law school 2 hours to the south, and an attorney there named Renata Solis wrote him back. She was unsentimental and precise, and her reply did not contain one word of comfort, which is exactly how Reed knew to trust her. It contained a question. Tell me everything about the medical evidence. And that question was the crack in the wall, the crack Reed had been too busy drowning to see. His entire conviction rested on 2 things and 2 things only: one broken arm and one coached and frightened child. And a broken arm is a physical fact. And a physical fact, unlike a jury's feelings, can be examined again by someone who wants the truth more than the verdict. Meanwhile, out in the world, Cora was Reed's eyes, and what his eyes were seeing across those months was slowly making him sick. His sister kept visiting Ivy, kept being the one reliably safe adult in the child's shrinking world. Every visit she told the girl the same 3 things, gently, patiently: that her daddy loved her, that her daddy was coming back, and that none of it was her fault. She said it even though Ivy had been told the exact opposite so many times by so many people that the child had begun to flinch at the sound of her own father's name. And Cora kept her journal. A bruise on Ivy's leg one spring afternoon. A mark on the girl's upper arm that summer that did not match any story. A new way the child had started to go silent and utterly still whenever her grandmother's voice sharpened. A stillness that Cora recognized with a cold drop in her stomach, because she had seen it once before, long ago, in her own brother, when he was a boy, around a different hard adult in a different unhappy house. The letter from Cora came in Reed's 2nd year, and he read it standing up against the wall of his cell block, and then he had to lower himself down and sit on the cold concrete floor because his legs would not hold him. Ivy was still being hurt. Yvonne was still doing it. And as Reed sat on that floor with the letter in his shaking hands, he understood, finally and completely, the machine he was caught inside of, and why it kept running. The line needed maintaining. A child who has been coached into a false accusation is not a one-time danger to the people who coached her. She is a permanent one for the rest of her life, because a single honest afternoon with a kind teacher or a patient counselor could unravel the entire thing. And so Yvonne kept the girl sealed the only way that a woman like Yvonne knew how to seal anything. She heard Ivy when the child spoke. She heard her when the child came close to the truth. She had beaten a 5-year-old into a false accusation, and now she was beating an older girl to keep that accusation from ever coming apart. And Reed was 200 miles away behind a locked door and could not put his own body between his daughter and the person harming her, which is the one job a father has, the only one that finally matters. And he could not do it. Reed Sutton has never known a despair like the one he knew on that concrete floor. Not the courtroom, not the handcuffs, not the first terrible months inside. Nothing came close to the helplessness of knowing his child was being hurt and being locked in a box where he could not reach her. But somewhere in the longest, worst night of his life, the cold and clear part of him, the part that had always known how to look at a wreck and see the thing that could still be built out of it, looked down into the despair and found, buried at the very bottom of it, the one fact that would set them both free. If Ivy was being hurt right now, at this very moment, while Reed was locked in a cell on camera, counted and accounted for every minute of every hour of every day, then Reed was not, and had never been, the person who hurt her. A man in a prison cell cannot break his daughter's arm. He wrote to Renata Solis that same night, sitting on the floor with the pad on his knees. And God forgive him for how the words felt to write, because no father should ever have to write them. He told her to stop looking only at the old injury. He told her to look for new ones. He told her that if she truly wanted to prove that Reed Sutton was innocent, then the terrible, unbearable way to do it was to prove that his daughter was still being harmed while her father sat in a state prison, unable to have done a single thing. It broke in the end, the way these things truly break. Not because of Reed's hundreds of letters, and not, in the final moment, because of his lawyer, though both of those things built the road. It broke because of his daughter, who turned out to be braver than any of the adults who had failed her. Ivy was 8 years old by then, and one ordinary afternoon at school, after a bad weekend at home, she told her teacher the truth. Not all of it, and not neatly, the way a hurt child never tells it neatly. But she told her enough. That grandma hurt her. That grandma hit her whenever she talked about her daddy. That she had been made to say daddy did the arm all those years ago, but that daddy never did it. And the teacher did precisely what a teacher is supposed to do and could not be talked out of doing. She reported it. And this time, the same system that had failed Reed so completely swung the other way, and it swung hard because this time there was a pattern, and a pattern is a thing the law cannot look away from. A proper forensic medical examination of Ivy turned up a map of injuries, old healed ones and fresh ones both, spread across 3 full years. And Renata Solis stood up in front of a court with that map in her hand and did the exact thing Reed had asked her to do from the floor of a prison cell. She showed a judge that the child had been injured repeatedly on specific and documented dates, while the child's father was locked inside a state facility with a guard's eyes on him around the clock. She played the recorded forensic interview in which an 8-year-old girl, safe and steady for the first time in her short life, named her grandmother and quietly took back every word that had sent her father away. And then she laid the original spiral fracture down beside all of it, and she showed the court, cleanly and without drama, that it had never once fit Reed's story, and had only ever fit theirs. You cannot unring a bell like that. A child harmed while the convicted man sits in prison is not a legal defense. It is a demolition, and it takes the whole building down at once. Reed Sutton's conviction was vacated on a gray Thursday in March. Renata Solis told him he was a free man through a scratched glass partition, and Reed did not celebrate, did not smile, did not feel 1 ounce of the triumph a person might expect. He was thinking about 3 years of bruises his daughter had worn while he sat on a concrete floor 200 miles away, unable to reach her. He was thinking about the cost of his own freedom and who had paid it. He walked out of that prison a few weeks later with everything the state had said about him formally erased, and with nothing else in his life yet restored. Not the house, not the restaurants, not the years, but he was free, and his daughter was finally safe, and the 2 women who had done this to both of them had, at the precise moment those prison doors opened, no earthly idea that their perfect, comfortable, stolen lives were already over. They gave Reed back his name that spring, and the hardest thing he had ever done in his life was not the 3 years he had just survived. It was the first afternoon in Cora's living room, lowering his big frame down to sit on the floor so that he would not be tall and looming and frightening, and waiting to see whether his own daughter would come anywhere near him. Ivy stood in the doorway for a very long time. She was 8 years old now, not 5. They had spent 3 years telling her that her father was a monster who had hurt her and then abandoned her. And she had spent those same 3 years being hurt for daring to say otherwise. And Reed could see the whole long war of it playing out across her small, serious face. "They told me you did it," she finally whispered from the doorway, not coming closer. "And I said you did. I said it out loud in the big room. It's my fault, Daddy. It's my fault you went away." And that, right there, was the thing those two women had done that Reed Sutton knows he will never be able to forgive. Not the stolen money, not the stolen years, not the cell, not any of it. They had taken a 5-year-old, and they had broken her arm, and then they had handed her the guilt for the entire wreckage of her own father's life. They had made a little girl believe that she was the one who had done the unforgivable thing. "Ivy," Reed said, and he kept his voice as low and as steady and as gentle as he had ever kept anything in his life. "I need you to look at me for just 1 second. There you go. None of this was ever your fault. Not one single second of it. You were a tiny little girl, and two grown-ups who were supposed to love you and protect you scared you and hurt you until you said a thing that wasn't true. That is not you doing a bad thing, sweetheart. That is them doing the worst thing there is. You did not send me away. They did. And I came back. Do you hear me? I came back, and I am always going to come back to you." She did not run across the room into his arms that afternoon. That is not how real things happen, and Reed knew better than to expect it. But she crossed the room, slowly, and she sat down on the floor near him, close enough to reach, and after a long while she put one small hand flat on his forearm, testing the way you touch something to find out if it is really there. And Reed Sutton sat as still as a stone and let her, and did not move, and did not cry until later, and that small hand on his arm was the beginning of the rest of both their lives. He had brought the photograph home with him, the creased one from the locker door, and that night he showed it to her. The milk crate, the raspberry, the laugh. She stared at it a long time. "I remember that," she said finally, wonder in her small voice, as though she'd found a piece of herself someone had hidden. "I helped you with the desserts. You ate all my raspberries," Reed said, and for the first time in 3 years, his daughter laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. And it was the exact laugh in the photograph, the one he'd kept alive taped inside a steel door, and Reed had to turn his face to the window for a moment, so she wouldn't have to see what it did to him. They were both still standing at the very edge of something enormous and unhealed. But she had laughed, and she remembered the raspberries, and it was enough to build on. Everything he had ever built, he had built from less than that. Here is the thing that Colette and Yvonne never once understood, right up until the sheriff's cars pulled into their driveways. The very verdict that set Reed free was the verdict that convicted the two of them. The instant a court ruled that Reed had not done it, and that the injuries had continued while he was incarcerated, and that an 8-year-old had recanted a coached and false statement, every sworn word those two women had ever spoken in that first courtroom transformed into perjury, and every one of Ivy's 3 years of bruises transformed into a criminal case with their names on it. Renata Solis handed the whole thing to the prosecutor gift-wrapped and airtight, because she was thorough the way a scalpel is thorough. Yvonne's abuse of the child was now documented across years. In the medical records, in Cora's dated journal, in the girl's own forensic interview. And Colette's part in it was uglier and just as provable. She had known. She had coached. She had put her own daughter on a witness stand to tell a lie. And then she had stood by, for 3 more years, and allowed that same daughter to be beaten in order to protect the money she had stolen with the lie. And she had stolen it. The house, all 6 restaurants, every account, all of it transferred neatly into her own name on the strength of a conviction that had just ceased to exist. The wife who had taken everything had built her whole perfect life on a foundation that one gray Thursday in March turned entirely to sand. She tried, naturally, to play the victim one final time. A frightened, overwhelmed mother, misled and dominated by her own controlling mother, a woman who had only ever tried to shield her child from harm. And Colette was good at it. She had always been good at it. But there is no performance on this earth that survives a jury hearing that you allowed your 5-year-old's arm to be broken, coached her to blame her innocent father, seized his life's work while he rotted in a cell, and then looked away for 3 more years while that same child was beaten to keep your secret buried. The town that had watched Reed Sutton led out of a courtroom in handcuffs got to watch Colette Calder led out of one in handcuffs of her own. And this time the room did not make the settled, quiet sound. This time it was loud. The rest was consequence. And after 3 years of watching consequence fall only in one direction, Reed found it was something to behold, watching it finally fall the other way. Yvonne Calder was convicted on multiple counts of child abuse and on perjury, and she was sent to prison for a long stretch of years. An old woman now, in a cell of her own, and Reed Sutton has never once spent a moment of his freedom wondering how she is finding it. Colette was convicted of perjury, of conspiracy, and of child endangerment, for using her own daughter as a weapon and then permitting that daughter to be harmed to keep the weapon loaded. And she was sent to prison as well. And she lost the one thing she had only ever treated as a tool and had never once loved. She lost Ivy, entirely and permanently, her parental rights terminated, the child she had traded away now forever beyond her reach. The money came back, most of it in the end. A wrongful conviction, once it is overturned, begins to unwind the things that were built on top of it, and Renata Solis and a very good civil attorney spent the better part of a year clawing Reed's stolen life back out of Colette's hands, piece by piece. The house is his again. The restaurants are his again. His name went back up over the doors of the Auburn location on a Saturday morning, and half the town turned out to watch it happen, and some of those very same people had been the ones who looked away from him at his trial. Reed let them come anyway. A man is allowed to be angry at his neighbors and still need them. And more than that, he wanted his daughter to stand in that parking lot and watch her father's name go back up where it had always belonged. The old sign had been taken down and sold for scrap the year Colette owned the place. Reed had a new one made, exact to the last letter, and on that Saturday morning he did a thing that surprised the crew who came to hang it. He asked them to hold off a minute, and he lifted Ivy up in the bucket of the sign truck himself, the two of them rising together above the parking lot, and he let his daughter be the one to guide the last bolt into place. She was serious about it, the way she was serious about everything, her tongue caught between her teeth. And when it seated and the sign held, the crowd below clapped, and Ivy looked out over all of it, over her father's name back up in the morning light, and the whole town that had once believed the worst of him gathered underneath it. And she said quietly, just to him, "It looks right up there." "It does," Reed said. "It looks right." And he held on to his daughter 40 feet up in a bucket truck and understood that this, not the money and not the vindication, was the thing he had been building back toward the entire time. They ran the desserts at that reopening. Reed put a milk crate in the kitchen, and Ivy sat on it, 9 years old now and too big for it and not caring at all, and she plated raspberries and ate more than she plated, and Reed pretended, the way he always had, not to see. Ivy is 9 years old now. She lives with her father, and with her Aunt Cora always close by, because Cora earned a permanent place in this small family that nothing in this world will ever move her out of. The flinch is fading a little more with every passing month. She sleeps with the hall light on, and the hall light stays on every single night, no questions asked and none ever will be. And in the last few months she has started slowly to become loud again, to narrate her entire life out loud the way she did at 5 years old on that milk crate stealing raspberries. And Reed Sutton has learned that the sound of his daughter talking far too much is the single most beautiful sound in the entire world. She still asks him, sometimes in the dark, at the edge of sleep, whether it was her fault. And Reed tells her the same thing every single time, and he will tell it to her 10,000 more times if that is what it takes for her body to finally believe it. "They took 3 years away from me, Ivy," he told her last week, pulling the blanket up on her chin. "They took the restaurants and the house and my good name and a whole lot of things that a person can lose. But there was one thing those two were never, ever going to get, no matter how long they managed to keep me in there." "What thing?" she asked, already half asleep. "You," Reed said. "You were always going to be mine again. I just had to wait, and I had to prove it, and I had to come home. And I did. I did. Songbird." They had built their perfect lives on the very worst thing that can be done to a man and his child. And in the end, they had forgotten the one rule Reed Sutton had learned building 6 restaurants out of a single broke-down diner. The rule that had gotten him up off that concrete floor every morning for 3 years when there was no other reason on earth to get up. You can take everything a man has built, every board of it, the name, the walls, the years, the good opinion of a whole town. You can take it all and think you have finished him, and go home and sleep well on it. But if you leave him breathing, and you leave him one single reason to get up off the floor in the morning, then you have not finished him at all. You have only made him patient. And a patient man with one reason will build the whole thing back, board by board, for as long as it takes. And there is nothing on this earth that can stop him. And Reed Sutton had the best reason there has ever been, asleep now down the hall with the light on, finally and safely and permanently home.